So I'm here with Kin Lane, API Evangelist. We are going to be discussing the most recent round of development on Referral's human service data API specifications. This is an open call, but it's been kind of short notice that we had that we were able to carve out this time. So this very well may just be Kin and I walking through this and recording it for others to follow along later. And if we do have anybody join us, we'll pause and chat with them. But in the meantime, let's just jump on in. So as some background context, last year we debuted the Human Service Data API protocols through a project funded by Digital Impact at Stanford Center for Philanthropy and Civil Society in partnership with the Alliance of Information and Referral Systems. The objective of that project was to develop a set of real-time data exchange protocols based on the human service data specification format that we developed in Referral over the previous few years. The idea being we wanted a common set of API protocols that any technologies could recognize by default for moving information about health, human, and social services from one place to another. We conducted a whole range of research into the various kinds of users and their needs, and Kin's leadership led us through the process actually of developing a suite of protocols, including one main one that just articulated the whole vocabulary of the human service data specification, and also a set of specific quote-unquote microservices that addressed particular users' needs, such as bulk data exchange, and in this case, a protocol for designing searches. Now, during that last round, the search API protocol was one in which we recognized that we really articulated something pretty minimal that would need more work to flesh out, more research, more deliberation, and more development to flesh out into something that could be truly useful. So though this whole process is an ongoing cycle of development, right now we're at version 1.2 of the Human Service Data API protocols, we wanted to revisit this particular piece of those protocols in between larger cycles once we'd gotten some more feedback from a variety of implementers around the field. So we've gotten that feedback, or at least some of it, and Kin has graciously set aside some time to work through it and to set us off. We've now gotten a set of proposals and I think questions from Kin about the various considerations that have come up in our process for Search API. And we're sort of now at the inflection point. We will sort of work through a whole range of issues and hopefully come out with a set of proposals that are prioritized according to the needs expressed by our community members. So with that prologue, I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions and we will walk through the GitHub repo, all of which is available through the notes that I'll link in the description of this session. Cool. Did I miss anything, Kin? Anything else you want to add?
No, I think you hit on it pretty well. Nice high level. I'll dive in a little bit into, we're at version 1.2, moving to 1.3 of the HSDA, but I'd like to talk a little bit about why we have the separate microservices, and we can keep going from there. No, it was a good start though. Thank you.
Great. Cool. So yeah, if you would, let's hear from you, just like at a high level, walk us through, as the technical lead, the sort of strategic technical mission of the Human Service Data API protocols, and the search protocol in particular. I have some more questions about, questions that I sort of can guess the answer to, but I'm curious to hear it in your words. Why specifically we need a search API protocol, and what our design objectives are for that in particular. So walk us in that direction.
So I think this gets at, this I consider this the search sprint, even though it's we're focusing on addressing a lot of the search issues and concerns, but it really spans 3 separate microservices. And I think getting at the why we have a separate service and the fact that we have a separate service, I think gets at some of the questions, because there's still confusion. There were some conversations on the Slack or on the GitHub issue about, well, why can't we have this? Why is this an either or? Why do we need a separate service? Why can't we just do this at the organizational level or the location or the service or the contact level? And the answer is, well, we're doing both. There is basic search query capabilities for each of the core resources, organizations, locations, services. You can search by query, which is a single keyword search, and you can search by queries, which allows for a comma separated list of fields that you want to search. And each of the endpoints has that basic capability. So you can search just contacts, you can search just organizations, just locations, and just services in that way. And my goal in breaking this off is because there was a lot of questions and discussions and additives, and my goal is to try to keep the core specification as simple as possible. I mean, my goal with the core spec is that someone should be able to do a basic query of orgs, location, services, and get a simple CSV without being a programmer. And trying to keep the bloat off of that functionality is kind of, I feel like, my job number 1, is because I want the API to reach the widest possible audience, not the loudest possible developers, who seem to be the ones who chime in. Not that they shouldn't be heard, just that, my role as gatekeeper is to try to defend that the spreadsheet, person can still get what they need out of it. And that's tough to do. So I try to separate out into separate microservices by area of concern. And search is one that, like, if you're going to want to do advanced level searches across resources, across organizations, locations, if you're going to start specifying fields and getting really specific with your searches and creating a powerful search tool, that probably should be a separate layer that people can, that we can have all that complexity in there. And I would secondarily add the same for taxonomy. Taxonomy is its own separate microservice for managing which taxonomy you use, because we're taking a somewhat agnostic. We're going to allow you to load up any of the top taxonomies, and then it will apply to the search tool. You will be able to search by taxonomy as part of the search tool. So trying to keep these as separate concerns, but overlaying with each other and working well, that's kind of what this sprint is all about, is to try to keep them separated, but keep them nicely dovetailed and working together and giving people what they want.
Right. And how would you describe, at a high level, the place where we left off with the search API and the questions that were sort of open there and that we're now starting to dig into?
So I would say the top level question was, why a separate service, which we just kind of discussed, talked about. It's both. You have simple search at each endpoint, and we have the more advanced search as a separate service. But the second level was really about how you conduct that search, which is a classic API design developer kind of question. And we had some of these in the last sprint, but whether you get your details in the path, meaning the URL path, whether you do all the work and heavy lifting as query parameters, like question mark certain queries, or whether you just post a query in the body of an API request. And this start getting a little geeky and get into the technical details, but developers have different opinions, about how you do this, and many developers want the full ability to just query whatever they want and get what they want. The problem with that is not all developers know what they want, and sometimes having well-designed paths give people a path, as the name recommends, a path to find the organizations, a path to find the locations, and paths, and then a few query parameters to kind of filter and sort and get at exactly what you want is very helpful. And keeping it simple, people get that. But the problem is loud, strong, opinionated developers really want to be able to submit a full, a bunch of queries and say, these are only the fields I want, and these are the values, and I want ands or ors, and I want a lot of complexity in there, and which is good, and we should work towards that and make the search service satisfy these needs. But we don't want that to be front and center and confuse people who are just looking to, query by a keyword in a single city, for organizations. So, so I'd say one of the best conversations I saw happening was around, well, how does a search occur? Does it go through the query parameters? Should it be available just as a single path, those query parameters? Or should it be, can I post a body saying, I want organizations that match this keyword. I want ones with funding models that match this. So you can give a very complex within the body. Now, the problem with putting it in the body is as I said, most of these developers are not going to know how to submit a post to the body. But Neil from iCarol and there were some other conversations on there about, well, if you post it in the body, it's much more secure search. And so, these are the things that weigh heavily or, become really important to me is now you can allow a developer or someone who owns a site to build a search on their 211, open 211 or open referral compliant site that allows for SSL encrypted secure search, so that if they're searching for, something very personal and in their community, that it can be encrypted and someone can not sniff out that message. And that's important to me. I think that's an important feature. I don't want to do away with the simple search. I want people to have simplicity and ease of finding search. But if someone wants to, institute an encrypted search, I want to be able to enable that. I think that's an important feature, even if the technical bar is a little high. And so I would say that was the number 2 most important conversation I felt that happened is, where should search occur? Should it search in the path, in the parameter, in the body? And again, my answer is, well, let's do it all, but let's do it in a way that's separated so that people who don't quite understand how to do a body search, that's not the first search they stumble across in the docs, that it's kind of a second or third tier layer, and your little bit more advanced users can submit, figure out how to do a secure search. And by making it its own feature, and in this case, one of the suggestions that was made was just make it its own path, so you can get at, the basic org is a simple search, and then org/secure search allows you to submit a body that is encrypted, because I guess I should back a little bit. You can't encrypt query parameters. Even if you send query parameters to an HTTPS site, it's not secret. Those query parameters are still public. And so, but if you send the body is actually encrypted. So I guess I didn't really articulate that. But so the goal would be to have it be a separate path that allows the submission of a body, but we also have other paths that allow for submission through the query. We also have, we do it all basically across all of them. You just got to know where to look, and we start with the simple and we go to the advanced. So I would say that was one of the most, the second most kind of interesting. And then all the rest, I would say most of we'll go through them, but we're pretty par for the course. I think taxonomy is kind of the third level that people are thinking about. I want to be able to get at things by a taxonomy. There was some conversations around categories, which really just kind of fall into taxonomy, and trying to merge those types of requests. And then beyond, everything else was pretty run, par for the course. So.
Okay, cool. So I'm looking forward to delving into some of these issues. I think I have another like high-level strategic question before we jump into the weeds again, which is, the idea of the human service data specification is to provide an interchange format, but it's extensible, right? People are able to, add additional fields that are maybe unique to their particular context, and we just sort of assume like this is just a tool for enabling interoperability. People are going to have to, do the work of establishing interoperability with that tool. And I think at the same level here, I want to better understand. I don't think the objective, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the objective is to build like the API that everyone will use, so much as to establish common patterns. And with the because I'm assuming that even though you are providing like this balance between a simple version and complex versions that do more, I still assume there's going to be cases in which developers need still more a functionality that they have to develop, business rules that they have to develop on their end for their particular purposes. So where's the balance between the floor that we're trying to set and, and the rest of the work that we assume that developers are going to be just doing themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple layers there at that level. Is one, companies don't have to, you can be HSDA compliant without adopting the entire spec. You don't have to have all of the services and all of the paths and all of the functionality that we offer. As you said, we're just trying to identify patterns and put out common patterns and try to at least have some sort of high-level 100,000-foot view that keeps them working together in a coherent way, which doesn't always happen when you're just doing one implementation. So you don't have to adopt everything. And we're still working on how to say, you should be at least 75% compliant, and how do we measure which paths you accept and which ones you don't. We're still working on that. But then the other part is yeah, you can extend it. You can do X- extensions for anything that's custom. You can add any field you want and call it whatever, any collection object. And when we're validating against that, we'll just ignore those. We don't look at those. And they're also a great way. I mean, I wouldn't say we don't look at them. We're not going to consider them part of the spec when we validate. But I do look for those kind of X- extensions, and it's a great way to actually suggest to patterns to us that we might want to consider. And we spend a lot of time looking through people's feedback and comments and emails and API documentation. But if you just do it the way that you want it and have an X- extension in your specification, that's a great way to suggest a feature to us. We might, consider. I would say there's one API. Was it one in Scotland that you suggested? Was it Anis or? But I took their entire API design, and they really didn't give a lot of feedback except for just through their implementation. And because they had good documentation, I was able to accept that as feedback. And there's actually one suggestion that I included based upon their API design. And so, yeah, this isn't meant to handcuff people. Do your design the way you feel it should be done. But all we ask is, hey, get a little more intimate with the common patterns we've aggregated and we've proposed, because if you use the patterns we're suggesting, the interoperability is going to be greater. And then if you become part of the process and some of your patterns become part of future versions, that boosts what you're doing and it boosts what we're doing because you've given us good feedback. So
cool. Yeah, I'm glad to see that that you went through the API documentation from Scotland. When I found it, I was like, I knew that they used the HSDS model, but I wasn't sure if they'd actually deployed HSDA or whether that was their own custom build. Were you able to get a sense of whether they were essentially using the protocols you put out?
No, they weren't completely. They'd used a lot of similar, patterns, and so it was open referral-ish, I would say, And so I think at some point, so it wouldn't validate as HSDA. like there just wasn't enough. But it could be an interesting discussion around, how much. It uses our contact model, it uses our location model, but the access to it was quite a bit different than we recommend with HSDA. So I mean, that's always the question: is, are they HSDS compliant, meaning they follow our schema, or are they HSDA compliant and they follow the API to access that schema?
And I think these are interesting ongoing conversations, probably for a little farther down the road, and ideally engaged with institutions like the Alliance of Information and Referral Systems to figure out, like, to what extent are these protocols going to be enforced by institutions as standards for which there should be compliance. Because right now at the open referral level, we're not like trying to get people to comply as if we're a standards body. We're simply saying, here are tools that may be useful and we hope people adopt them and use them. And farther down the road, as things evolve, there may be harder questions about, to what extent should certain aspects be really sort of monitored and validated, and
and I would say, we're trying to get people to do open API, or excuse me, open referral and follow HSDA and HSDS, but we're also trying to encourage people to follow some of the patterns, like using the open API specification, and even just using good API documentation practices. Like the one in Scotland, they didn't have an open API, but because they had fairly clean, standardized API docs, it's a lot easier to extract feedback than it would be like from a PDF documentation or some of the others I've seen in the space. But if organizations used open API to describe their API, which brings a whole bunch of benefits like documentation, code generation, a bunch of things, we can also much easier watch and look for patterns. And so sure, we want everyone using open referral and following, the specification, but just any common patterns is healthy for the space, I think, for all of us to work together. And we'll do the heavy work of looking at your docs and trying to extract the feedback and whatnot. But so we're trying to share other patterns other than just the spec.
Cool. All right. Should we jump into, some of the issues, or anything else to say before we do that?
No, I think I already started talking a little bit about some of them, so I think it's a good time to dive in.
So just to structure this a bit, ideally we'll sort of just walk through the laundry list, but yeah, what I'm eager to get out of this conversation is, what are the top set of priority issues that we think really need to be honed in on, that we really need people's buy-in to one way or another.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole laundry list of stuff, and I appreciate how thorough it is, and we also want to be able to direct people's attention to the things that sound like they're the most important ones. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we're still at the feedback stage. I mean, I've kind of whittled it down to a bunch of these search specific that we'll go through. I would like to take another look through the HSDA, because like some of these changes are going to move the HSDA spec forward, because they're not on the core search service. They're adding to the search layer of HSDA. So I want to see if there's anything else we want to put in there that's not search related. So I'll do another kind of just quick going through of the issues without my search lens, just to see what else. But we tried to isolate them as individual issues. So each one we have kind of a landing page for this sprint, but then we have individual issues for each one so that people can actually comment on them. I did do my best to extract from the existing conversations, what people are talking about, but I don't always get that 100%. So continuing the conversation is important. The worst part for me is to go, well, should I put this feature in? We had initial conversation around it, but now we don't have none. Should we wait to put it in, or should we just do it? Because once it's baked in, it's baked in. So it's always nerve-wracking for me to do something when there's no feedback on it, or additional feedback. So let me share my screen.
Okay.
Alrighty, so we should be looking at the GitHub issues HSDA search sprint. And so I call this the HSDA search, which is the search service. But it actually, as I said before, touches HSDA, the core, and then HSDA taxonomy. So there's actually 3 services that get moved forward. You can see that represented as labels on the right-hand side. Each service that this will touch, I try to keep it labeled. I'm not always getting them that way, but each bulleted item here is a separate kind of feature. Some of them are a little redundant, but it's because I'm applying it to, one is about applying it to HSDA, where the other is about applying it to HSDS or ACE search. So I have a separate issue for it, but I try to link to where the origin of this conversation originated from. I try to I have an open API definition that represents the change, and then I have an issue thread just to talk about this specific issue.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and dive in, because I've already talked about this one a little bit. This is the secure search, and this was just really the great conversation between Neil and Rasmus and us on the GitHub issues about having a, let's see if it pulls up here. But yeah, so it was really what was suggested, and this is why I try to articulate things as open API, so that I can have some sort of visual here to show. But you know, right now you can search just organizations, pass it a query string, and search for organizations. That's the basic search. But rather than adding, you can't add a post to that, because when you're adding an organization, that's a post. So to be able to do a search using a post, which is more secure, the conversation, I believe it was Rasmus that said, add this path. You know, let's just add secure search to each individual resource, so that someone can do just a secure search, passing in the organizational object as the search. So they can just pass it in, and they can choose which values they want to search by. And then of course the implementing system has to handle that and figure that out. But we're just providing the guidance for the interface, and it just returns, you know, the organizations that match that search. So you're doing just an organization search. Here's the same for locations. And then here's the same for services. Now, you know, one complaint we've had in the past is like, there are just so many paths available. And, you know, if you're getting at, you know, sub-resources of services or organizations, if you're, you know, adding, updating, deleting, there are a lot of paths. But on your core documentation, you don't have to show them all. You can show just org locations and services and the simple endpoints. And then on a separate page, or on a, you know, a way of, you can show, you know, these additional paths to more advanced users based upon, you know, how you structure your documentation. So just because, I mean, just because we have a robust spec doesn't mean you have to implement the whole thing. And then B, if you do implement large portions of it, you don't have to display it all to all users. You can make some of the advanced features on a second page and call it advanced usage, you know, so it doesn't get in the way of people using it. But I thought this was, there's another thread on privacy of open referral systems and respecting people's privacy. And I would say this secure search is one that I think starts really adding features to that list, so that, you know, when people are searching for, you know, a sensitive subject, or some, you know, we can start giving more guidance around how to make sure that the people's privacies are met. So that's the.
For a long time, when people have asked me about privacy issues, I've been able to say, oh, you know, good thing we're only dealing with public information. But I have known that actually precisely in this issue, the question of search queries, that our domain does bump up against personally identifiable information and potentially, you know, HIPAA compliance issues and other issues. So I'm super glad to hear all this, because now I also have a way to address that sort of like edge of our domain where we do really need to think carefully about people's privacy.
And I mean, I would say that articulates another reason why to have it as a separate service. We really don't want that to burden down the core basic search. We want, but we have this layer that, you know, if you're going to implement, you know, compliant search, you use all of these paths. Don't allow for search via the simple ones. And so and this can be audited through logs. There's ways to ensure compliance. And if it's its own path, it just makes that much easier to enforce and make sure people are doing. So yeah, I think, you know, I was under that influence when I started this project that, oh, it's public data, this isn't a problem. But especially in the last couple of years, you know, what people are searching for, and when it comes to, you know, public searches, it can be pretty sensitive and private. You know, if it's religious services, if it's you know, other personal health, there's definitely some privacy concerns, even if it's, you know, on a public search for searching for public information. And so I think we got to really start thinking about this. So that was an interesting conversation, the secure search, you know, feature. You know, I'm not saying we have to do this as a separate path. I'm not saying this is just my recommended approach based upon, you know, people's feedback. I didn't come up with this feature. I'm just kind of isolating it and saying, hey, we should add this to each of the resources in the course in the HSDA, but it can be considered an advanced search feature and doesn't have to show on the main page. It's posting, so it's secure, but, you know, depending on your use case, you know, it's not going to allow for caching. Performance, you know, it's where if you're doing a basic search that's available now, that's going to be much more cacheable and fast and leverage the web to deliver quick results. So really, you know, which search you choose to use as an implementer should depend on, you know, what your goals are with that search. And we're hoping to, you know, with this will cover a little bit larger of the spectrum when it comes to, you know, what these considerations are.
Great.
Search service locations. So there was a missing dimension, being able to, you could, I believe, search by, let me see, you could forget which side of the coin was there on one side. So we had just basically not connected all the dots. I don't think this has any detail on it. It's just pretty basic that you can search for locations by or services by location, but you couldn't search for locations at a service for a service. So it was just a missing part of this, the many-to-many relationships that's there, because you should be able to search for locations by service and services by location, come at it in any direction. So this wasn't like a feature thing. This was just like someone pointing out, hey, where is this? This should be there. It's logical. Another thing that was not included in the last when I spun off the HSDA search was it searched, you know, when you search in just HSDA against organizations, you get just organizations back. When you search against locations, you get locations back, and same with services. When you search for HSDA search, you get back organizations, locations, and services that meet your search, but we left out contacts. And then I also suggest we add programs so that it had, so when you search by keyword, it'll search all, was it 5 of those core resources and bring back result in a single result of what you're looking for. So it's searching across all the resources the core resources that we offer. I've also saw other discussions around adding, you know, address specific, so searching just by mailing or just by postal. But I thought this was a good first place to start before we get too deep into the other sub resources.
Wouldn't the address just be location? Help me understand.
Yeah, so the address, you can search by address, you know, yeah. But it was the one conversation was just submitting like a full address block, basically a a JSON that had address, city, state, zip.
Right.
And rather than just searching, saying, hey, I want to search by, I want to search by those fields, actually give that object, that schema object, and search just specifically. Say, here's the full object I want to search by, rather than a basic keyword. It was just another advanced layer to be able to search using a certain set of fields in a certain order and with certain values. So I don't know if that didn't really make sense to me. So.
And also help me understand context, and the context as its own object. This is where my technical limitations, I think, are coming up against my understanding. Because contacts are basically like the phone, maybe the point of contact at an organization or email address. Is that right? And I was never sure why that would be its own object as opposed to something that you just get through organizations or services.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But I'm starting to see, I've seen some feedback and seen some use cases in other systems I've implemented where you want to have just a Rolodex across those organizations. So it's just the CRM layer of this. And if you want to search by just a phone number, you're just searching for who that person is in their phone number, not in the context of the organization or the location or the service that they're at. You're just searching for a specific person. I've seen this, and this ad, and maybe we don't add it here, and add contacts, or we add programs in this way, because you should always search for it in the context of a service or a location. But when it comes to like doing mail merges and stuff like that, sometimes, and this might beg for the physical and the mailing address to be brought up in the same way, is, so say you want to actually do a mailing across a certain zip code, canvas an area. You want to build a call list. You want to build an address list to do a mail merge. So you're doing that by zip code. You're going to search by zip code, or which still may filter by the locations and services, but the output itself isn't going to be in the context of the service. It's just a pure list of contacts. And so that's why I'm suggesting, adding it here is that if you wanted to get just a set of contacts for that mail merge, that's just one potential scenario.
Okay, I can potentially see that, especially in the context where like maybe you're trying to deliver somebody like a set of potential referral results, but just like the contact information for those referrals to make it a simple, document for somebody.
Yeah, and get a list of CSVs of names and phone numbers to call when you're trying to reach District 7 in a specific that kind of thing. So it's
okay. Yeah, I mean, I see where that's going. I wonder, I haven't heard a lot of that use case articulated myself, but that may just be because people haven't really been like thinking of it specifically. So on one hand, maybe it's not a problem to have it in there. On the other hand, I don't know if there's a point at which we actually want to figure out, what are the parts that we've articulated that we actually want to scale back. And this was always something that came to mind when people were like, oh, there's so much going on here. And I'm still wondering, like, is the right, it makes sense what you say earlier, just like put it in the advanced usage documentation, don't put it up front. And if that's just the best possible answer, then great, we have this possible use case. But this might be one that we want to check in with folks to see, is this actually worth including? And for your time and energy and others, so I can think of a couple of organizations out there that might really value it.
Yeah, agreed. Though, if there's not feedback, and if it's just a possible use case, I'm a much bigger fan of going for real use cases. So I have no problem saying no, we should not do this. So I agree.
All right, so I'm going to make a note to actually check that with the group, because I know it's come up a lot of other times. Like, it's come up when I've just been showing people the documentation, and they're like, "Oh, why is contacts there?" And when I wasn't always able to explain it. This makes sense to me, but it's still something I'll check with the group to see what they think.
Yeah, because we might want to just accent and not have it in there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. What's next?
So after that, then we start, I think, getting into where you know, we need to bring out more of the fields that exist, you know, with sub-resources. In this case, it's locations, longitude, latitude, and radius. There were several threads and suggestions about handling a proximity search, allowing for a proximity search. And this is where we start bringing out specific fields that are specifically typed. This is, Neil had made the comment, you know, about the types of records, being able to say, you know, I want to get at just organizations, just locations, just services is one type, but then also having your fields be data typed. So in this case, rather than just a general keyword search, we're actually saying, you know, we want a latitude and longitude and radius, which are actually numbers. They're not strings. They're decimals, and actually allow for specific search, proximity search, using the advanced search. So again, why I'm proposing this as two separate issues, because, you know, per the last one, add contacts and programs, we might not do it. You know, we might not choose to do both of these. So we could, the first one is HSDA proximity search, which would mean adding latitude, longitude, and radius to, let's see if I have the example here. Hopefully I have the example. There it is. So it would be basically adding these three fields to each endpoint of organizations, locations, and services, and then organizations complete, locations complete, and services complete. So basically we'd be adding 3 parameters to each of those endpoints, which does make things more complicated for those basic search, but this is one of those advanced features that we, you know, might be worth having there at those endpoints. Now, the second task or issue here is HSDA search proximity, which is the same thing, and we're adding those 3 fields, but rather than adding it to org, locations, and services, we're just adding it to the HSDA search. And so, you know, by having these as 2 separate services, people can vote it up and say, you know, I only wanted this in search. This is, you know, per the argument, this is bloating, and we shouldn't add it to every single endpoint for the core resources.
Right.
And so this gets at why I have things as separate as separate issues, so that people can vote up or down and help. You know, I would say don't put this at the search parameter if we want to stick with, you know, what I was saying earlier about keeping things simple.
Yeah.
Because every field we add adds bloat to each endpoint. But if this is needed at the basic search, to just go, I want to search just for organizations within this range, or just search for services, where HSDA search is going to give you organizations, locations, and searches. So if we just need it here in search, let's just do it in search.
Right. I mean, okay. First of all, I've definitely seen people implement search features in interfaces that say, you know, search for, you know, something around this, you know, within X miles of this address.
Yep.
And so I guess that's them implementing it just like at the application layer of their own accord, you know, just designing those business rules on the application layer. And this is essentially baking it into the search protocol, is essentially what you're saying, rather than letting it just be up to them.
Yeah, they would have to do so I mean, to do a radius proper, you do that with latitude and longitude. They would still have to geocode their address into a lat long.
Right.
And so we don't want to, you know, because to go 50 miles radius of 1, 2, 3, 4, Main Street and zip code is harder than doing it with a latitude and longitude. So there has to be that translation at the application layer.
Yeah. Well, I also, okay, so this is helpful. This is an issue I can bring, you know, we can point folks' attention to specifically. I mean, location, I can't guess why this would be relevant at the location level, unless again, I'm not technical enough to understand. well, sorry, I said location. It seems relevant to the location issue, not to organization, just from my perspective. But maybe service, it's relevant because some services have a specific service area that they're associated with, right? Like you can only access the service if you live within this particular area, which seems like this might be relevant to that maybe. What's your thinking on how it could be relevant, let's say just at the organization level?
I mean, you know, give me all the organizations that operate within this radius. You know, that's, you know, all it's doing is doing that on location, but then passing it up and just returning the organizations. So it's the exact same search, just what the end result, you're getting locations or you're getting organizations.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, it's probably not a priority use, but for people to be able to go, hey, you know, who's all operating you know, within this radius, give me a list of those orgs. And these are our potential partners. So we're not actually caring about the locations or the services. We're caring about the overarching organizations.
Okay. Okay, cool. This is helpful. I think, based on my limited knowledge, I think I'm guessing that, you know, adding it into the search, but not the core protocols, makes sense.
Yeah, that's my, you know, to stay true to my argument, having this a separate service, that would be my vote.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put it out there in case people, you know, I would rather keep the core services search simple,
right.
Simple, and plus the secure one.
Yep.
But you know, that's again up here. You know, we don't have to do the secure search across all of them. Actually, I didn't break it out in the same way. I don't know why I didn't do that. Seems like maybe this should just be on the advanced search and not on the you know, on the individual, but I don't know. We can have that conversation on there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's proximity, which is, I think, makes sense. It's logical. And just whether we do it at the global search, HSDA search, or the individual, I think is what's up for debate. Mm-hmm. Search by postal codes is similar. So, you know, it's another facet that needs to be brought up from the underlying, you know, and just make sure, you know, because validating like a keyword search and searching by keyword is less precise than if you say, give me a zip code, and you validate that as being a number.
Right.
And then you pass that and you apply it to a specific field, knowing it's a number. That just you know, it's similar to latitude and longitude and radius. I'm able to validate these field types. I'm able to validate the postal code, and then I'm able to execute a specific search against fields because I know that the type is good, which gets more precise than just doing a general keyword. So postal code at the individual path as well as at the general search. Again, we can have that debate. You know, maybe we just add it at the HSDA search, and we don't bloat, you know, each individual path with it.
Okay.
All right. So moving on, the next kind of overlay is for taxonomies. And let me refresh my memory here because sometimes the layers get me. Oh, okay. So this was adding taxonomies to each path. So basically, you can say, I want services. I want to get all the taxonomies that are used for this service. I want a specific, here's a specific taxonomy, and here's where you're saying the same for complete. So basically, this was adding the ability to manage taxonomies and see taxonomies for a specific service. Mm-hmm. This isn't search. This is seeing what taxonomies this has and being able to just get the details of that taxonomy for that particular service.
And by taxonomy, are you thinking like 211 Airs has a taxonomy? right? The legal aid field has a taxonomy of legal problems. There's the open source, open eligibility taxonomy. There are other taxonomies. And so if I'm understanding the HSDA taxonomies microservice enables multiple taxonomies to be managed in association with, managed and queried in association with, a given service.
Yeah. So the HSDA taxonomy is about just managing those taxonomies. So we support you can add any of them. It can have any name. It can be a parent or a child. And this is a schema. This is not, this is what Tim and crew and everyone, has already been defined as part of the HSDS. Mm-hmm. I just extended it to the HSDA and then each one can be part of one or many taxonomies, heirs or open eligibility. So is creating the structure for you to put the name in, and then you describe which taxonomy it comes from, and then the hierarchy, and you can add them, you can get them, and you can update and delete them accordingly. And so this is just pure taxonomy management. Right. When it comes to actually what I just proposed is actually managing it making sure you can manage it at the service level. This isn't in fully implemented in HSDA. Mm-hmm. So we have just where you can just get the taxonomy name, but you can't get a list of the taxonomies
And let me understand, because sometimes is it the name of the taxonomy as in the whole set of categories, or are you actually referring to like the taxonomic category within a taxonomy as like?
Well, I think you can do both. It's just you reference it by name, and then where it exists in the hierarchy of parent ID and parent is defined by the taxonomy. That's my understanding of it. So you can say this name, this taxonomy term or category applies to a service. Its relationship to other taxonomies and names are in the taxonomy system, not part of the service. So you associate individual taxonomies with each service, but how they're structured and what vocabulary they're part of is defined here as part of the taxonomy.
Okay. The way I have been thinking about it is like you might associate a given taxonomy term with the service, right? But I wouldn't associate. I hadn't been thinking that I'd associate like a service like childcare with a taxonomy or multiple taxonomies, as in the 211 taxonomy or open eligibility. I would associate the service of childcare with the appropriate taxonomy code or the taxonomy terms.
Yeah.
And maybe there are different taxonomy terms for the same service with slightly different vocabularies that come from different taxonomies. But the taxonomy term themselves are like the plural of taxonomy code or taxonomy term or categories is not taxonomies. The taxonomies are the plural, like taxonomies as a plural refers to multiple taxonomies, right? Does that make sense?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And
so the vocabulary is what governs, where that comes from. And then the taxonomy term and taxonomies is governed by the taxonomy service. What I'm proposing here is just further fleshing out how that's managed at the individual service level to make sure there's a set of paths for adding, seeing, getting, because I think we just had the ability to see and not. So it's just making sure all the features are there so that you can manage it at the service level. Because if it's not there, if you can't manage it for each service, add, update, delete a taxonomy from an individual service, can't actually search by it. So I had to set the table for search by taxonomy by making sure all the features were there.
Okay.
So I'm guessing I have to double check my math and make sure the design's here, because this was the hardest part for me. Like, what was already in taxonomy? Yeah. So this is V11 of HSDA taxonomy. We already had some elements, excuse me. And so I think I got it all in there.
Okay.
But double check my math.
Yep.
These two are now exposing it at the individual path level. so that you can search organizations, locations, and services by taxonomy. And it basically allows you to either add taxonomy ID, search by taxonomy ID, so the numeric ID code, or the taxonomies, the name. And you can comma separated lists, and then it will search across organizations, locations, and services. Mm-hmm. Now, if we don't need it, you know, like the conversation we just had about organizations, mm-hmm. all of these are going to be doing all of these. If you search at organization level, it's just going to search which services have that taxonomy. All right, return the organizations that match that. Same for locations. Search for, you know, services with the taxonomy, give me a list of locations, mm-hmm. or just get a list of services. So maybe we don't need it at these two levels and allow this drill down. We just allow it, you know, to return services that meet that taxonomy.
Okay. Okay.
And then the other one is the same, but for just HSDA search, and we're allowing for search by taxonomies at the HSDA search path, wherever it is. It looks like I just used this same copy and paste, but basically adding these two fields and allowing you to search by taxonomy now.
Okay, I think I get it. Some names are coming to mind of people I want to check this by, and it seems like now I'm seeing a pattern across all these issues where you're essentially asking, if I can try to repeat this back, you know, for various kinds of functionality, some of which are pretty important. Should these functionalities be included in the core objects, in the core spec across various objects, or are they quote unquote like advanced search functionalities that can just be relegated to HSDS search?
Exactly.
Okay, great.
And so we reduce bloat at the core, mm-hmm. and we apply the feature functionality at search. Right. And that the complexity grows there. So,
and essentially you're asking the community, like, for these different issues, like, is it okay to reduce the bloat and keep them out of the main spec and keep them just in this advanced spec, essentially? Or are any of these things so important for any or all of the objects that they should actually be included in the core spec?
Exactly. Okay. And then I'll also add a higher level motivation is having these separated and asking these questions. While I don't always agree with, you know, like, I don't think we should have it across each of them. I want to give people the option to help educate them that this is not a either or. It's a either, you know, we can do all of it, but do we want to do all of it? And I want people voting on that. Okay,
cool. So, and I'm just thinking about how we're framing this for the group. It sounds like there's both the question of, do these structures look right? Do they seem to work for you? And also the question of, are these core or advanced functionalities, essentially?
Yep.
All right.
And I know these are a little more difficult because this spans 3 services. Mm-hmm. So taxonomy spans taxonomy, search, and core, you know, mm-hmm. and so my goal is to try to, you know, keep the concerns separated, but try to you know, reduce complexity at every turn. So, okay. Go ahead.
It seems like there's one other issue. You want to touch it real quick?
Yeah. Well, let me just wrap up because I think this is search related, but it's not core search. Okay. So I would say that really wraps up a lot of what I saw around search. Mm-hmm. Being able to search by taxonomies was in a couple threads. Being able to search by postal code, being able to do by proximity. I really don't feel contacts and programs is that important. I think it probably could be axed, but and then service by location was basically a mistake on my part, and we just need to get in there. But secure search, I really think was an amazing community suggestion, and I really encourage people to go to the comment and look at the conversation that Neil and Rasmus were having, because I really feel like this is how things should be done, you know, and they put in a lot of thought and really laid it out, the pros and cons. And so I think this is probably one of the best features to come out of this. Some of these others are good, but it's not saying there wasn't there were some other search related stuff, you know, talking about more GraphQL-like searches and other things that are not reflected here. But this, I think, reflects, you know, V1.3 of HSDA, V1.1 of HSDA search, and V1.1 of HSDA taxonomy. So yeah, I'm looking forward to everyone's feedback. This last item, HSDA count headers. So there's a challenge in that when you're doing searches and you do large searches, that you need to know, you know, you're getting back a large amount of results. We will cap that at usually 100 or 250, and we allow people to specify how many they want returned with a count and page, and they can navigate that. But people don't, when you, if say you did a search and it came back with 250, but there was actually 1,000, there's no way for you to know there was 1,000. And
Okay.
part of, we can put this in the message itself, but because organizations, locations, those allow for basic CSV, you know, results. You can't wrap that and say, well, there's, you know, here's 250 of 500. Can't have those in there because it changes the object. It's a breaking change, and it would make it so spreadsheet owners couldn't do that. And so this is a challenge we've had since V1, you know, when we first launched, but it's a known challenge. It's something we want spreadsheet users to be the baseline. So where do you put this count total? It needs to be there to explain that, hey, there's still more results here, and change the page number to 2, and you'll get the rest of them. So we're putting, you know, I'm proposing, based upon, this is how GitHub and a bunch of other APIs do it, is they just return a header, which, you know, is part of every API response and request, but it's not shown in the browser. It's not shown in the message. It's a separate set of fields that get returned. And not all developers are going to know to look here. So there is some concern there, but it's a great way of articulating the count. And then people can change the page and page count based upon what that number is. So say it's, you know, say they did a search for organizations, they got back, you know, the page count was 100, so they're only going to get 100, but there was 105 results. So to see that, those last 5 results, they're going to have to increase the page size, so it's 150, and it'll include all of them, and do that search again. Or they'll change the page and say, give me page 2, which will then just return those extra 5. And so this is classic pagination kind of trouble that people have with APIs. I did propose some other solutions for it with V1.1 HSDA that people didn't really like, hypermedia and other things. But I would say this is a good compromise solution to giving people the ability to see what the counts are for their searches without just breaking anything. So does that make sense?
I think so. It's a little beyond.
Yeah, it's a little out of your pay grade.
Yeah, but it makes sense. And I'm also looking through the repo. It looks like Benj from Health Leads has been getting into some of the comments and asking questions that we might have just touched on. So this conversation will continue. I feel like I have a clearer sense of the choices that we have to make. One last thing, somebody, one of the developers out there said to me, you know, what I want is an established hierarchy. You know, like, I want to figure, you know, I want a predictable way of, you know, knowing, like, should this go through organizations to searches, to services and locations, or should, like, services be, you know, at the top of the hierarchy? And it seems like you're actually suggesting here something that's saying, like, this isn't a hierarchical relationship. Fundamentally, these are many-to-many relationships. But, like, a developer could still choose a hierarchy according to their particular needs. Am I right in anticipating your answer to that question?
I would say it's partially right. I would say, so there is a hierarchy defined with HSDS. The schema is, the schema is pretty set in you have organizations, locations, and services. And then the sub objects within those, you have mailing address, physical address, phones, contacts. So the schema dictates a hierarchy of how it should. My role is access to that hierarchy and access to that schema. And I'm trying to create many different paths to get what you want, and trying to please as many people, but keeping things as consistent and intuitive as possible. So, so I may bend that hierarchy, because if you're looking for just services, you don't care about the hierarchy. But some of the people, why we created the complete view last time, people want the hierarchy all the time. They want all searches to be, organizations with all their sub objects, locations with, all their sub objects, which include services as one of the sub objects for a location. So they want to see all that. If I search for locations, I want to see all the services in that response that I get. And so or you can do locations simple and it doesn't have the services. You have to hit another path to get the services. So I'm providing different ways of flattening that hierarchy or drilling into that hierarchy. But the hierarchy, in my opinion, is dictated by HSDS, which I don't, I'm giving feedback on, but I'm not in charge of. So. Okay,
that's great. I can point the particular developer I had in mind directly to this particular part of our conversation and see what he says. In the meantime, thank you for your time. This conversation will continue, I'm sure, but we can wrap this up now. Your final thoughts just on what questions do you have for the community at this time? Like what suggestions do you have? How do you want people to respond to this?
I mean, I would say, so next steps from my vantage point is we need more feedback. We always need more feedback. We need it as precise on those GitHub issues as we can, because my biggest challenge is navigating, when someone starts talking about one issue and another issue, and how do I cross-reference and make sense of that. So making the conversations as precise as possible. There's issues, so that helps. The second is I started using OpenAPI. You see most of the features have a snippet that say, here's what I'm adding, here's what I'm removing. I know not everyone's OpenAPI Swagger fluent as I am, and I respect that and understand that. I encourage people to try to get a little bit more, because it just affords us much more precise conversations to be able to go, here's what I mean, here's what I mean. And if you see each of these changes that I've suggested has an open API that I can then merge with the master. And that's the next step for me, is to create a master HSDA v1.3, HSDA search v1.1, and HSDA taxonomy v1.1 open API for all three of those. This is the contract that we're proposing. And the more people are able to provide feedback within that kind of framework and construct, I think once people get there, and I'm even going to get you there, that's like my my task for 2019 is those little YAML snippets. I mean, look, I won't share my screen again, but that's totally within your pay grade to be able to go, longitude, latitude, and radius. Here's the field names. You may not be able to go, oh, this is an integer type, and get down to that technical detail. But I think you'll get there. And I think the more people we use this kind of lingo, I think the more people are going to be able to provide feedback, which will make us be much more precise in how we do what we do.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to wrap this broadcast up. I see some comments already in the GitHub threads, and we will probably pick this conversation up again later this month at a time that works, hopefully on same day, same time, but one of these weeks.
Yep.
All right.
And keep it going via the GitHub and Slack. It's great to see.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
All right. Thanks.